Into the Nexus is a production of amove.tv. Bookmark Amove TV for other great video games and esports podcasts. Into the Nexus is sponsored by listeners like you via patreon.com/ITN. Greetings and welcome back, everyone, to Into the Nexus, the podcast all about Heroes of the Storm. I'm Garrett Weinzierl here, as always, with Kyle Fergusson. We are also joined once again 2 times in the same month by NotParadox. Welcome back, Paradox.
Yep. Thank you guys for bringing me back. I appreciate it. I'm excited for this one. This is the thing, guys.
This is gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. This is basically this is the sequel. We did a sequel episode.
This is a sequel
to the draft talk.
We should have ended in a cliffhanger.
Oh yeah. So how would we have set that up? Had we done that, it would have been all right. It's you, your friends. You're in a cabin. You and your 4 friends are in a cabin, and another 5 people show up outside your door. You can only see one of them. It's the first pick. It's Butcher. How do you react?
You can ban one of you could ban one of their friends if you want. No,
it's a horror. Well, it's October. It's like a horror movie. Like there's 5 famous killers outside your door. Who do you want to ban? Freddy? Do you want to ban Jason? Or do you? Have
you guys seen the movie Cabin in the Woods?
A million times. It's only one of my all-time favorite films.
So we had to watch that in film studies, which is, by the way, a great movie to watch in film studies because it's something that you should never be able to watch at school. But we had to watch that high school film studies, and it was really interesting. For how
our age difference was just put into.
Let me double check. I could be wrong about this because let me actually see when this movie came out. I could have this wrong, but I remember I did have to watch this for something.
I was like, I don't think we're that big of an age difference between us, is there?
Oh no, I definitely did not see this in high school.
Okay, all right. Whew. I'm like, maybe it was
the one that I'm thinking of.
Maybe it was Cabin Fever.
No. This is still the movie I'm thinking of. I guess I just didn't watch this in high school. Anyways, I don't want to spoil anything about the movie, but it just reminded me of that. It's a great movie.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah,
going with that.
Out of curiosity, Kyle, if you knew that 5 famous slasher film murderers were coming for you, who would you ban?
The Murder Court.
Okay. You're going with Cabin in the Woods options. Okay.
Yeah, but it basically was. There was a draft. You had a bunch of boxes that were moving around. Everyone watching was hopeful for their favorite hero to be selected. You know, sometimes an unlucky year comes around.
That's why it reminded me of that. Was it just seemed like there's a bunch of different things. Like, what are you going to choose? Like, could you put one on your team? But yeah.
Nice. Well, I would want the ancient one on my team. That's the one I choose. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about, we're going back to how to draft, but today we're talking how to draft with friends, essentially, with a team of people you are on comms with that you can coordinate. We are talking about coordinated drafting, everyone. Part 1 was solo drafting. Part 2 is coordinated. So we're going to basically go through the same kind of like early pick, mid pick, late pick discussion that we had on our solo draft episode. But we're going to talk, you're going to get a little more specific. You're going to make even more educated decisions because you can be able to talk to your teammates. But let's kind of start surface level before we get into the actual draft order, everyone. Let's say we don't even have a full 5 stack yet. You know, Kyle, it's you and me playing, or Paradox, it's you and me, or maybe it's all 3 of us playing. How do we get maximum value out of our draft if there's only 2 or 3 of us hanging out together?
So, I mean, I mentioned in the last one that you only really need 3 people to make a comp. So I think there's really 2 choices if you're playing with like 2 to 3 people. One is to fill out as many roles as you can, so you at least make sure that you don't have like a major downside. Or 2 is to just run your full team comp between your 3 people. So let's say, for example, I mentioned before Variant Taunt into Tyrande Stun into Jaina Blizzard / everything else that she has. It's a guaranteed kill. Everything else after that's overkill. You three could go and get guaranteed kills in every single lane because this isn't actually using any cooldowns longer than 15 seconds. So every 15 seconds you get a kill. Very, very strong. You could go with something like that. Or you could go with something that's more of like, you know what, let's make sure that we have a good solo laner because we're on a map that needs a solo laner. Let's make sure that we have a tank so our team doesn't take really bad fights because everyone kind of follows the tank in. And then let's just make sure that we've got something with wave clear and camp clear. So we'll pick like a mage. And you could go with either direction. I think both are perfectly fine if you only have 3 people. I think the biggest downside is if you try to pick like both your damage and then you have a bad healer that just never follows, or you have a solo laner that's just losing Braxis forever. I would say for the most part, you're pretty safe, but I would try to do something really that works with you. Yeah.
Because it'd be so easy to get a solo laner and then say, okay, now let's do tank and support. But now you're at the mercy of that DPS, recognizing what those other two are doing. And the solo laner being isolated still means they're in coordination. We're going back and forth based on rotates and can be a very powerful play. So instead, making sure we have control of the tank, the follow-up damage, and then we immediately can just give away the support, which is the reactionary role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know it, Kyle. I love playing solo laner in on comps, even if it's not a full group. There's nothing I love more because you know what I love? I love someone just going in my ear, hey, just stay there. We got this. That's like my favorite thing in the world. My favorite thing in the world as a solo laner is, hey, just keep pushing. We can take care of this.
I didn't realize like how good that sounds until I've played solo lane. And then when someone told me that, I'm like, oh, then you don't even know what's going to happen. You know, like when someone says like, oh, we're actually winning this objective without you. I'm like, if I'm playing like Malthael, I'm like, oh, we're going to get so much soak. We're going to be like 5 levels ahead now that you told me that. Or if I'm playing like Sonya and I just got Wrath, I'm like, they're going to lose their keep real fast. Like I'm going to take everything in this lane. Like the second that they're like, oh, we don't need you down here. I'm on Sonya. I'm like, oh, it's begun.
Yeah.
So yeah, that once I played solo and someone told me that once, now I do that all the time. Like if I start winning it all in the 4-man, I tell my solo laner, I'm like, just stay up there, do whatever you want. Like we're good. We don't need you. And I just wait to see what happens because there are some days, man. There are some days it gets crazy.
That is where you hear me reply in the like most malicious voice ever. Call for missing. Like I'm just going in. It's wonderful. Yeah. It's so good. I love it. That's like my dream scenario as a solo lane player. I just absolutely love it. Just pig and shit. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I like that. That's a good way to think about it. Like, do you want to roam and just get kills constantly, or do you want to cover most of your bases? That's kind of a good way to look at it. So obviously, if you're going to go the Roman constant kill route, you're going to want to be practiced and have a plan. But that's something you might have with your friends.
Yeah, I think like the worst case scenario for 2 people is taking like solo lane and support, because you're literally at the will of your team for like everything. And you just have to like let them get whatever they want. And there's a good chance your 4-man is just going to get blown apart, not take any camps, not get anything. So I think that's like the worst case. If you have to take 2 things, is solo lane and support. You want to try to take things that you can at least nudge your team in the right direction. That one, it's just so hard.
Yeah. And now before we get kind of into the nitty gritty, let's talk about 5-stack. Overall, bird's eye view. How has the draft changed in the most basic form?
I think in general it's about the same as before. So when you're with a 5-man group, you still need all the same pieces that you've had before. I think some things are a little nerfed, but they can still work, like double tank, double support, stuff like that. But the only thing that I think really shifts the meta that much when it comes to drafting is the map. And so with new maps being released, changes the strategy. New heroes being released doesn't usually, like one hero, because there's like 85 heroes or something in the roster, one hero being released usually doesn't make that big of a difference because all you have to do is ban it. you know, and then suddenly that hero doesn't make like a huge meta swing. It's the maps that make the meta swing. So that's where I would say from the last time that you guys have discussed the draft, I don't think anything major has changed for 5-man groups. There's slight meta like adjustments that have like, we've had like meta swings of like, oh, mobility meta, where a bunch of like Overwatch heroes released and we've got high mobility, and then we had ways to counter that, and then we had like heavy tank meta, and now we have ways to counter that, and we had like the press R to win meta, and then a lot of those ults got nerfed. So there's I think for the most part the ideas are about the same. There's just more heroes to look for, more heroes to adjust to, and more maps to adapt.
So would you say the maps are kind of the main modifier for how you look at your 5-stack draft?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's some comps that would work on like any map, but I think for the most part, you should always be looking at the map.
That's what kind of triggers your pocket strats.
Yeah.
So let's look at the team roster, because we talked about a solo roster before. We talked about like you're stepping in the draft for the first time. You need a roster. You need to have multiple heroes you're able to play depending on, you know, how the draft goes. What happens now that you're trying to figure out, you know, what you're pulling from when you're playing with 4 other people? How are you selecting your roster?
I think you need to think a little bit more about the team fight, because if you're with a group of 5, most likely the matchmaker is going to try to pull a group of 5 against you, or they're going to end up bumping up the rank of everyone against you, which means that individually you're all going to struggle, which is why it's very important for you to not only have all the pieces that I mentioned, but to have a general idea of what team comp you want. And there's a lot of meta team comps, and I think the most common one that people would think of is the Wombo combo, right? And I always describe the Wombo combo as a setup and a follow-up. Setup would be something like a Void Prison that locks everyone down. It sets up the team fight in a place that you want it to be, where you want it, and it sets up to where everything that you're trying to do will land. A follow-up would be something like an Apocalypse, a Ring of Frost, for something like an Void Prison. Something that, like, when the Void Prison turns off, something major happens. Another setup could be like an Entomb, where you can lock in a whole bunch of people into a small area. They're not stunned, but you could use, because it lasts a lot longer, Entomb lasts 4 seconds, you could do something that's longer damage, like an Entomb and a Breath, Lightning Breath. You can do an Entomb and a Starfall. You can do an Entomb and, like, I mean, Starfall doesn't do that much damage, but you see where I'm going with this. And now those are the combos that you're going to be looking for a Wombo combo. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs 1 or 2 things that means if the enemies step in the wrong position, you win the fight. And that's it. That's all you really need to focus on with those. That's the most common. I always recommend the blow up composition, which is pretty much you do a major stun that's easy to land on 1 person, and then your whole team has very easy, small abilities that can finish off that 1 person. Taunt, 15-second cooldown. Even if you just use ETC slide, which is the same duration as taunt, 1.25 seconds. Then you follow that up with some sort of CC from your support and some sort of burst from your assassin. You only need 3 people to make it work. Wombo combos, you only really ever need 2 or 3 people to make it work. So all of those is when you have a 5-man compared to solo, is when you finally have the coordination to do something like that. You look at the meta team compositions, and there's a lot of them. I mean, there's blow-up comps, there's Wombo combos, there's stall compositions, there's front-to-back compositions, and then there are dive compositions. Those are pretty much all the meta compositions, and I can go over them for hours, but I'll just give a quick mini description, and I won't mention any heroes. But essentially, Wombo combo, setup, follow-up. Blow-up comp, picking 1 person out of a team fight. Stall compositions are all about stalling objectives until you hit power spikes, or stalling out things that are like bursty so that you survive the burst and then they have nothing left. You have dive compositions, pretty straightforward of what it actually sounds like. You dive into the enemy team before they're ready for it. And you have front to back, which is, again, what it sounds like. You kill the enemies that are in the front first, and then you go to the back. Usually things that melt tanks. And those are like all the meta compositions that you're going to find. And how you want to try to play those out is up to you. Usually I start with like whoever has the smallest roster pool on the team of 5, and I try to draft around them. So let's say one person like only ever plays, let's say Jaina. You're going to want to look at things going, oh, well, she works for wombo combos and she works for blow up comms. Let's run her in those. Let's say someone only ever plays like Junkrat. Well, Junkrat gets the strongest after level 16 and he pokes. So you'd want to run like a stall composition. And so you're always looking at something like that, where you're looking for like, what does the smallest roster pool player on our team have and what does that work with? Nearly every hero in the Heroes of the Storm roster fits into one of those comps. I would say the few exceptions are like the heroes we just never see in competitive. And then you can always do some like cheesy stuff too. Like some like Juice Pirates are just like full push comps are things that'll sneak out here and there.
Now, there's one more thing I'd like to kind of get into before we talk early pick, mid pick, late pick, which is something I think that's pretty unique to this discussion, which is assembling your team and kind of the conversation around the varying levels of ability for each member of your team. So say you've got all 5 of you, your buddies, your good friends, you all play Heroes of the Storm. You have decided every Thursday night we're going to get together. We're going to try and cue into those Into the Nexus idiots on their patron bonanza and clean their clocks. So let's say there's like an obvious best player on your team and an obvious, the newest player or the player that's, still learning. I don't want to say weakest, but, there's going to be a disparity of skill between you and, between the 5 players. Where would you like your best player to be and where would you like your newest player to be?
I would say best player. If you are doing some sort of combo, best player should always be the setup, because the setup is always the most difficult thing. You can only set up fights when you are, 1, when it's a good fight, and 2, when the enemies are out of position, which setup tends to be the tank. So I think the best player should usually be in the tank. They control where the fights are going. They control the fights you take, the fights you don't take. So I would say the tank is going to be the best, but if your best player is just like an assassin main, put your best player on their best role, and then just have them shot call, the worst player, I think it's easy to say support and just be like, oh, you just sit back, because again, if you're going to be comboing enemies down, you almost don't need any healing. If you're going to be doing a void prison into an APOC, they're going to be stunned until they're dead. So you don't need any healing. Also, the healing tends to be one of the easier roles. It's just that it can get a little weird here and there. So I would say healer. I would say the next would probably be maybe just a secondary assassin, because if your one assassin player is really good, your secondary assassin, all they need to do is like add a little bit extra to the fights and it's okay. So I'd say like a secondary assassin is probably the second place to put like the weakest link of your team. But I would never put them in the tank. I would never put them as like your primary assassin, or and solo lane's risky because it's such an important role for counterpicking. It's very risky to put your weakest player there, because if at the end of the draft, if you realize that you need something and they don't have the roster pool, I would say that's risky. But that's kind of where I would put that, I think. I feel like there could be a little wiggle room there, because I feel like you could be a newer player, and if you've been one tricking solo lane, probably fine to put you there. I think, definitely. Yeah. As long as your team can still like answer, like if you first pick as solo and then your team kind of is looking out for it, I think you're fine to be the weakest link there. It also depends on what you mean by the weakest player. Weakest roster versus weakest players could be very different. Like there are some really good players that only play like 1 or 2 heroes, and then there are some like really bad players that at least can do every hero okay. I'll see like a player that's like bronze 3, but every hero is above level 50. And I'm like, that is incredible. It's a lot of Netflix. So that's a lot of Netflix. Very true. Yeah. And then finally, I'd like to talk about shot calling. And I kind of want to aim this more at you, Kyle, because I know it's something it's been a while and I feel like you're really good at it now. But I know in the earlier days, you struggled with this because you've been historically a solo MOBA player. You came from Dota, like Warcraft 3 mod Dota.
and you always played solo. And I remember in the early days, I was like, Kyle, tell me what to do. You have more experience with this than me. Let's go. Come on, Barco. Because I'm the type of person I like learning by being told very bluntly that I suck, that I'm doing something wrong,
right,
and to do it right. That's how I like to learn. And I remember I really had to goad you into it. But
I think that's fair because I never talked while playing video games. I mean, streaming will help you shot call just because you learn to work your mouth while working your hands and your eyeballs at the same time. But eventually, I ran into a whole different issue with my own team, my 5-stack, in that I had the largest roster because I played the most. But that put me in the solo lane, and I was the shot caller.
Mm-hmm.
And shot calling from the solo lane is nearly impossible.
It is pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, the best you can be is like, I've got 2 in my lane. Whatever you're doing down there, do it hard. Get me some buildings because I'm holding the line here.
Mm-hmm. This is basically the only thing I ever say to you guys when I'm playing on Rexar is like, hey, there's 2 up here. Get nuts.
That's the extent of it. So we had to work the shot calling role onto other players. And eventually what we found was we sort of divvied up the jobs. We had a shot caller for when camps can be done because she loved doing camps. We have a shot caller for the engage because Lyric was on cooldown for Entomb. And that's where things got weird again, was I ended up on the Varian doing the charging, doing the taunting for the engagement. But eventually we found that was too easy. Like you right-clicked and then you clicked again. So performing the assassin job became a higher difficulty choice to be in range of the Varian and what he's making happen. And so we switched around there.
I've kind of an easy answer for this. I've been coaching teams for shot calling for a while, and that's actually one of the coaching sessions that I do is specifically for teams that are trying to learn shot calling. You need a number 1 person just to be the final decider in case there's an argument. Everyone should be sharing their major cooldowns or their major things that they do. And there should be a lot of autonomy between each role too. The solo laner should know when they should join the fight, when they shouldn't. You can't ask every time because in the middle of a fight, you might not know if you need the solo laner down there. So the solo laner should always be getting there. But then if you realize you're dominating the fight, that's when people should tell the solo laner, you just stay up there, you know? But here's the easy out for everyone. Tank shot calls when to go in, healer shot calls when to get out. Because the healer is watching all of your team. The healer's watching your cooldowns, your mana, and your health. The tank's watching the enemy's cooldowns, the enemy's health, and the enemy's mana. Because the tank's always watching them because the tank needs to be ready to peel or ready to engage. So the tank is going to be calling out when it's viable to engage. If an assassin player says, go in, go in, go in, but it's a bad time to go in because the tank's watching, they're like, they still have all their abilities. They're in a really good position. And the assassin player's like, go in, go in, go in. That's a bad fight. You just lost. So the tank's the one that should be watching when the enemies make mistakes and go in when the enemies are making mistakes. The healer should be watching all of your stats and going, you know what? We've used a lot here. I don't think we win this objective. And that's when the healer and the tank might have a disagreement where the healer might say, hey, we have no ults. And the tank says, well, they have no ults. And that's why you need one person to be the final decision of anything to avoid any disagreements, because the longer you disagree, the more your team falls apart. So it's so much easier for someone to just say, this is it, the final word. And then at the end of the game, you say, let's check the replay and see if we could have done this differently. You know, but you don't ever argue about it in the game. You say, we'll check the replay. We'll check the replay. We'll check the replay. If it turns out bad, we'll check the replay. You learn from it. But if it turns out good, then you learn what works. And so I always just recommend tanks are we're going in and this is who we're looking at to take out. Healers are I don't think we should be taking this fight. And the final decision could be anyone on the team. But they just need to. Solo lane's still pretty rough, but yeah, that's shot calling. I don't like assassins being the shot callers because you're normally pressing a million buttons and stutter stepping and doing a million things, so you're kind of busy. And the assassin shot callers for me, I always kind of make a joke about it. They're the shot callers that will talk and tell a team fight, and then they shut up. And it's like, that's sometimes when you really need the most shot calling. Like I always say that the best shot calling is when you hear one hero name on the enemy team shouted for the entire team fight. Because it's like that hero will die. And in fact, I was teaching this group. They were all like high school kids. And I kept saying, like, practice is very in comp. And whenever you're about to taunt someone, just start shouting the name of the hero. And that's what happened. They were playing against this open division team, which was essentially teams that were prepping to be pro teams. And this group of high school kids, they started just dropping this open division team. It was hilarious. And every time I listen to their comms and they're sitting there, they're like, all right, we can go for this. We can go for this. And then it's just out of nowhere. It's like Orphea, 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 Orphea. And everyone just dives in and takes out Orphea and the fight's over. And it was like, that's what it should be. And the tank calls it out. And I always say the tank should be saying, I'm looking at this person. So like, I'm looking at Orphea. And then right as you see, everyone just starts shouting Orphea right as the taunt goes off. And that's how the comms should work, is like the tank should be looking at someone, everyone should call it out, and then the healer should be like, all right, we're out. And it tends to work out really well. Camps, again, there should be some autonomy. Once your team gets a plan of how everything should be happening, most people do camps when they need to do camps. You almost don't need to call it out. It's just someone that says, hey, someone cover this lane, I'm going to go do a camp. You don't really need a shot call for that. Yeah, it's like you do camps before objectives to do distractions, and then you just tell your team, hey, I'm going to cover this for this, or I'm going to do this camp, or I'll cover your lane while you do a camp, or you just kind of let people know there should be autonomy to most calls. The major calls that you should need your team for is setup. And that's usually whoever the setup is going to make that call of, I'm looking at this, I'm going in. And then you should be making major calls on, do we do bot? Like, you get a couple kills. Do we do boss? Do we do a camp? Do we do forts? And that's something that your shot caller needs to learn from. So your shot caller needs to make those calls and learn whether it's good or bad based off of the result of the call. So 100% of your team needs to follow that call, even if you disagree with it, so that you can all learn that it was a failure and a bad call, so that afterwards we can say, okay, now when this happens, let's not do this, let's do this, and you can learn from it. But if your team's like half following and half not following, all the calls won't work. So you need that final decision of, this is it, and that person needs to learn whether or not that works. So anyone can be your shot callers. I just recommend tank, healer. That's
my favorite shot caller ever. And sorry, Kyle, was Dunk Train back when we were playing games with him. Because like the first time I ever played with him, I think he was just like, Vala dies, and I'm like, what? He's just like, Vala dies. I just look at the map. I'm like, oh yeah, Vala's really out of position. It's just like, it was just a statement. Like him saying it just made it come to pass. It was the calmest thing ever, because I just came from the world of in video games, like you shout and you yell and everything. And Dunk just had this really calm, just name of hero, dies. That's it. That's all he had to say, and everyone. And I think focus
90% of the time, like those are the calls. Is like, it's mainly just an observation, and then usually you'll have someone have a confirmation. You know, like someone will just be like if you're the main shot caller, that's all you say. Oh, this person's out of position, they die. I usually say no escape. Like if there's someone that we can, if someone doesn't have an escape, I'll say Vala, no escape. And then we would look at it and go, we all like converge slowly, right? Or I'll say I'm looking at Vala, and then, but yeah, it is pretty funny to just say Vala dies. Yeah. The only time I recommend like the shouting is when there's like a short CC. You don't want your team to like miss out on the opportunity of a CC that only lasts a second. And 1 second, and here's the storm, is enough to take out half a team. So that's why it's really important to make sure people are looking at the right things when you do it. But for the most part, shot calling could be calm, like all the way through. It could be really, really calm. It's just for like those couple seconds that really matter. That's when it needs to get loud.
We would all yell bathtub. That was our favorite. We had an Entomb and a Jaina, and we called it the dirty bathtub. So every time you had a pick, you just started yelling bathtub, bathtub, and everyone threw whatever they got in the bathtub.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Do you have any advice for a team who wants to put themselves together, but they're missing an essential role? Like, they need a tank and no one's really stepping up. They need a healer and no one's really stepping up. Is there a class of player that you can kind of target and be like, you play a lot of mages, maybe you can heal?
It's tough. Like moving into the tanking role in general, it's like it's a really different mindset. You can't just go in like every other role. If someone's in your sights and it's safe to hit them, you can hit them. But on a tank, you can't use your abilities on everyone that's safe to use abilities on, because that's almost everyone all the time. Because you're a tank, it's safe to do whatever you want because it takes a lot to kill you. But then you're wasting your abilities, you're wasting your mana, you're wasting everything. So like tanks are all decision making. It's probably the hardest role to push someone into after everything. I would say ranged has the easiest process of switching between other ranged and the healer, and I would say the flex role, in case again different from the roles that I was mentioning, but flex tends to be the easiest to switch to solo lane only because wide roster pools in both ways. It's the easiest to teach assassins because it's just mechanics, and it's pretty easy to teach healers because it's just positioning really. The hardest roles to move into, I would say, is solo lane and tanking, because their mindsets are so different. Solo laning, you actually need to know how to freeze lanes and why it's important to freeze lanes. You need to know when to join your team and when to soak. You need to know the value of double soaking while your team's pushing. And tanks, you need to know when not to go in, because that's probably the most important thing to know on tank. So I would say your damage and your heals can all be moved around, but you really need to get some like lessons. If you're missing a tank or a solo laner, you need to start watching like the competitive scene and going, well, what do they do and how do I learn that, and start adjusting from there.
Something Kyle, you and I have brought up before, and this was usually in criticism of someone who's opinionated in a solo queue draft. But if you ever find yourself going, oh man, I really wish the tank had peeled there, or I wish the tank had anchored better there, or whatever, if that's constantly going in your head, you're probably the tank. You're like, that's how I think a lot of us end up in the roles that we end up in. Yeah, I ended up doing solo lane because I was like, boy, I'm sick of hearing that death sound every few minutes from the off lane, whatever it may be. Or I'm really mad with these mercenary camps not being taken when they should, which, that's a little further back now. I've really not doing mercs anymore, but that's how I ended up on that. That's how I ended up.
Some people, sorry, I was just going to say, like, some people were in those roles that, and the other thing is swapping roles sometimes can be really good for your mindset. I had this one guy I was tanking, or I was coaching for a while, and he played only Garrett. And he kept complaining that his damage had really low damage at the end of every game. Whether they won or lost, they always had less damage than the enemies did. And I said, well, have you ever thought that maybe it's the tank you're playing, that you throw someone, you stun them, and they die before they can get any healing, which means that the amount of hero damage your team is doing is like half, because they don't need to worry about doing the health bar 2 or 3 times because that healer's healing them. They die before they get any heals. And he just didn't get that. And sometimes I'm like, a role swap could be really healthy for a group of 5, just so you could understand the other roles. Positioning for healers, like my KDA on almost all my healers is above 10. And I'll show people, I'll say it's all positioning. Like if you're dying as a healer, something's usually wrong. And they're like, oh, well, I'm not getting peeled. It's like, sometimes you don't need to get peeled. You just need to be in a position where you're safe, And I think that's the confusing part, is like, if you play tanks, then you realize you can't peel everyone. You can't engage and peel at the same time. So you either get engaged on and then try to peel, or you engage and everyone needs to follow up, or else someone's going to end up dying. So that's the confusing part, is like, it's great to have all the roles, but sometimes like where you're like, oh, the solo lane keeps dying all the time. You go and play the solo lane, and you can learn one of 2 things. You can either learn that all your solo lanes sucked, and this is the role that you're really good at, or you're going to learn, oh, this is different. I'm getting ganked a lot. Like, I need to understand how to apply pressure when our solo lane dies. We need to adjust or something. But
I've had both. At first I was like, I was born to play this. And then the movement speed change happened, and I learned I'm getting ganked a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens both ways, and I've been there too. Like I switched to the solo lane role because I was like, man, I feel like solo lanes are bad. I'm like, oh, I see. I just haven't been understanding this whole time. When I switched to tank, I was like, every tank in this game is terrible. Like I switched to tank and I was like, this is a whole new world. Like when I switched to the tank role, I was gold 5. And I'm not kidding you. It took me like 2 weeks and I was already masters, almost grandmasters. And I was like, everyone's playing tank wrong. And I can't believe people aren't getting this. And that was the one role that I was like, it's a mindset thing and it's hard to change the mindset. That's the hardest role, to change the mindset. It's not a difficult role as far as mechanics go. Once you understand what you're supposed to be doing, it's the easiest role. The mechanics, I would say, like assassins have the easiest decision making, but the most difficult mechanics, and tanks are the complete opposite. And so it's shifting roles. If you feel like you're just not keeping up mechanics wise, but you always know what to do, try out tank. And vice versa. If you feel like you don't know why you're losing most of the time, but you're really good at mechanics, I would say switch to damage.
I dig. All right, let's actually talk about the draft. Let's get into it.
Cool.
Let's do it. Let's talk early picks. What team compositions should we build? And you put a lot of the onus on maps, so maybe that's a good place to start. How do we start building a map comp?
Yep. So if you have 5 people, again, we break down the map by what the pieces are. Alterac Pass is the first one on there. What are the pieces of this map? Firstly, ginormous map, probably one of the largest maps. What's good on giant maps? Globals. You can soak lanes. You can, as the solo lane is running to the lane, you can soak 1, maybe 2 more waves and then jump to the team fight. It's a 5v5, but you have 2 lanes of experience on the enemy. Those 2 lanes could be enough to where you hit level 10s before the enemies, and that level 10s before the enemies means that you win the objective. So that is something that you want to be looking at, is big maps, globals. It's a map that requires you to hold an objective for a long period of time. What is good for that? What is bad for that? I would see someone pick Uther or Rhaegar on those maps, and I'd be like, you're going to run out of mana real fast. Like, I'm not sure that's what you want to be doing. So looking at the healer's role, and this is where when you get into a 5-man, I mentioned this in solo lane, that whatever your main role is, you'll know what's good on that map, what's bad on that map. This is where it gets confusing with a 5-man, is early, like 5-man's a lot of times that just get into a team and they want to like make sure that their shot caller is leading the perfect team. Still have some autonomy in your role. Give, again, observations and confirmations. So you say, I think on Alterac Pass, Lucio would be great for this, unless we want to run something in particular. Now, if you're a 5-man group, having a pocket strategy for every map could be really good. Say for Alterac Pass, you go, let's run a VP comp. Let's Void Prison, let's do a Wombo combo. And because the enemies are going to be sitting there trying to defend for a long period of time, if we could just catch them out one time and win, we just won the objective. So you can have a plan.
Just you kind of turn the expectations of the battleground against your enemies.
Yeah. So it's like, instead of like trying to pick individual heroes that are good on map, come up with a strategy that just works for that map. Blow up comp, you kill one at a time, they can still poke forever. So I wouldn't do a blow up comp. I would do a Wombo combo. Let's do a bathtub. You know what I mean? So then you get that bathtub rolling, and now you've got, any time that 2 people on their team gets like grouped together, you killed 2. Now they can't defend 5 versus 3. So let's run a bathtub. And that's what you should be looking at on those maps. We go into Braxis, right? What are the main pieces of Braxis? Long fights, and solo lane needs to win. Mm-hmm. So what do you run? Sustain, stall comps, or let's run a dive comp and just like whenever they're not ready for it, send a couple dive heroes up top. Get a kill up top, you hold both points now. They're staying on bottom, you dive into their bottom lane too. You can run a dive comp. So you think more of coordinated play and less of individual heroes that are good on that map. You try to find actual team comps that are meta that will get those wins. I find like Tomb of the Spider Queen's one that I think people don't think through enough. The first initial thing that you see on that map is you need the wave clear because you need to be able to get those gems. But when are the times that you feel you get the most free turn-in? For me, it's when we wipe the enemy team. So I actually usually run like either heavy dive comps or I run like wombo combos on that so we can wipe them and get a turn in. Because if not, I feel like you just never get turn ins on that map. So that's what I do kind of on that one. There's a unique map of Towers of Doom where the strategy tends to be only pocket strats. If you find any team that's running this map, it's always something weird. One of the comps that I usually tell teams to practice on this map is Zool double soaking top and mid, and then you have 4 people just endlessly push bot lane. And it's one of those maps that if you can control one tower of the enemies, you're going to be ahead for the rest of the game, and it's going to make it to where you can give up more objectives. So I run like a Sylvanas and a Greymane down bot. So if the enemies ever try to like send an extra person up top to kill Zool, you take their entire bottom lane because you turn off the structures. Greymane's the fastest siege damage in the game. So between Greymane and Sylvanas, if they send 2 people up top to go deal with Zool, you just won the entire game pretty much. And so that's where you can pull out like the pocket strategies on those maps. But generally, if it's a team fight map, go with team fights. If it's other maps, you still want to like Battlefield of Eternity, you still need to draft race. I mean, at some point.
Are there any kind of general rules if you say you are going the route of drafting for battleground strategies? How does the early and the mid and the late pick, are there any general strategy for that, like who to pick when, so that if because you're not guaranteed to get all the picks that you're hoping for?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So if there's one key piece to your strategy that you absolutely need, you need to pick that early. Say your comp is a stall composition, you need a global. You have to have a global on a stall comp. There's no other point to stall the objective if you're not getting a huge advantage by stalling the objective. So you need a global, and that's contested on those maps. So you get on Cursed Hollow, Abathur's likely going to be banned. You might see a Dahaka ban and possibly a Falstad ban. So you need to pick ETC or someone that can like sit in the soul lane. I mean, his global doesn't come till later, so you'd probably want to try to grab Falstad or Dahaka. But like you need that global. So that's the biggest thing. If that's your plan, you need to pick those pieces first. The map specific pieces that might be contested, those first. Outside of that, mid is just filling in your comp. If you're using a blow up composition, you need burst. There's a lot of heroes that give burst, and sometimes the ones you want get banned, like Jaina. She'll get banned or picked. So you might need to change up and pick like Orphea or something. Her burst is still right on par with Jaina. She just doesn't have the camp clear. So it's all about your plan first. You should see a map and go, what are we doing? Right? Like, what is our plan to win the game? So if I saw Cursed Hollow, I'd be like, stall composition. Let's get all the pieces together. We need Abathur first. And then I'd say we need some poke to stall out the objective. Let's pick up a Junkrat. We need sustained healing. Let's pick up a Lucio. But if Lucio's banned, let's pick up, like, you try to pick up the ones that are more like niche first, and then you pick up like the ones that are more open. Like, so healers I'd pick last in a stall comp because there's a lot of sustained healers that can do a stall comp. But yeah, that should be, if you're in coordinated play, get a coordinated strategy, pick those pieces first that are good for that map. And then you can go to like all the other stuff.
So on your Towers of Doom example, we had a Sylvanas, a Greymane, and a Zool.
Yeah.
If we are,
I would try to pick like,
yeah, what do you?
Yeah, I would say the Zool would be the first, because the only thing you can replace him with that's equal in the no one's as good as him for double soaking. Zool is by far the best because he not only clears the lane, but he also summons extra minions that the enemy now needs to deal with. No one beats Zool, so I would pick Zool first. Then it's pretty obvious of what you're trying to do, but it's just a matter of, do the enemies know how to answer that? But your team comp still does exactly what it needs to do. So that's what I would say is, like, you pick Zool first. And then if you don't want to run the Zool, but you still want to do something, like you want to keep it more sneaky, you could just pick the Sylvanas first. It still is a really big piece of that puzzle. And then you can ban the Zool, or they could ban the Zool, and then you could take like Malthael. He does it good enough, but he doesn't like summon all the extra minions. So that's kind of what you want to do, is like, if there's only one piece that you absolutely need to a puzzle, let's say you're trying to run like you want to run the bathtub. Who do you need for the bathtub? Leoric. Like, you cannot do the bathtub without Leoric.
Required, yeah.
So if you feel that is going to be the best for that game mode or that map, you need it. Now, instead of Jaina, you could do Orphea and just drop down the everything. Instead of those, you can do Mephisto. You have 2 people that are sitting in there. You have no cooldowns. There's a lot of other answers. I mean, even just a Maiev like gets Q resets off of 2 people, so you just get endless Q resets. There are other options for that, which is why pick the thing that you absolutely need first. There's no other answer to it. Then you can start filling in the comp with all the extra pieces in the mid-tier picks.
So basically, identify where your flexibility is.
Right.
Yes.
And we're making this decision based on the map and our personal skills. So right now it has nothing to do with the enemy team in the first place. So we're not worried about
not at all.
Counter.
Nothing. Yeah, you don't need to worry about the enemies at all. You don't even know what they're trying to run. If you see a map like Battlefield of Eternity and you're like, oh man, like Alex Straza and Kerrigan are great on these maps. Like, you know who counters that is like, let's go this hero that counters that first. And it's like, and then they just don't go that at all. And they weren't planning on going that, and they just go like Cho'Gall, and you just choked out all your answers for dealing with Cho'Gall early in the draft because you thought that they were going for something else. It's like, you shouldn't focus on them because you don't know what they're doing yet. They might have a different pocket strategy so you should have your pocket strategy, and you should force the enemies to try to react to you, because you are going to know the best answers to your strategy, and you can ban the answers to your strategy, or you can counter the counters. You know, there's a lot of stuff like that you can do to adjust around it. But you want to start off with, how do we win this game? Let's lock that in first.
So I noticed while we were going through our comps here on the early picks and on the maps, we didn't do front to back because that's a counter draft to enemy tank.
Not really. Front to back is like a yes and no. Front to back's not exactly a team comp that like needs a lot to work. It's more of like a team comp that's like, we want to run something safer. Maybe for the map you're on, like Alex Straza, you say she's really good on a map. You just need a comp that makes her work. She's really good for front to back because the fights don't move very much in front to back. So you can just drop down a W, go Dragon Form, drop down another W, pop your ult, and then use your ult on whoever's sitting in those Ws. And your front line's always going to get healed from that. So she's really good for front to back. And so you would pick her for the map, and then you'd draft front to back. Another thing that would be good for front to back is, say you get Jaina and Ana. And same thing, Ana, you want front to back because your teams tend to fight out in like a full line. You've got the front lines in the front, you've got like middle DPS in the middle, and then you've got healers in the back. Ana, if you're fighting in like a line, she can heal through your entire team. And she can turn off the healing of the enemy front line, and then you can nano boost to Jaina, who's great at just blowing up the front line. So front to back tends to be like, you see something that's pretty good on that map, or you see the combo that you're going for. Maybe you're not going for a major combo, but you just have some strong heroes in your team. That's when you draft front to back, is you just, or if the enemies aren't picking up a lot of divers, like if they don't run a dive comp, front to back almost always can beat a variety of comps. Just because if they're not diving in your backline, you're building a comp to win standard team fights, the most basic team fights. You're already building a comp that beats that. So it's kind of more of a, if you are answering everything that the enemies are doing, I would say front to back is the most common. If you pretty much just outskill the people that you're going against for whatever reason, the draft, you just feel like, you say you're in a division and you're just the top of your division and you just want to play it safe, then you're going to try to do front to back on every map. But other maps that are just good for front to back are maps that force team fights. Battlefield of Eternity is actually the best example of this. You're likely going to pick one race hero, and race heroes are usually heroes that you don't want to do anything weird with. Raynor doesn't really fit with wombo combos. He doesn't fit with blow up comps. He doesn't fit with any of those. Greymane, same thing. He works okay with dive comps, but not much else. Vala is great for racing. Again, she's in that build. She's okay with blow up comps, but in general, Battlefield of Eternity is front to back comp. So you want to make sure that you're drafting it well, because if not, you run a full wombo combo, you wipe out the enemy team, you just don't have enough race. So that's why it's important to draft her on the map first, then team comps, and then go from there. So if there's certain heroes that are really good on that map, then you try to build a team comp around them, and that's where like front to back then is Like you said, but we're like, we could pick Tychus against the dragon. Oh, and he also works great front to back. So not fits multiple things.
Gotcha. So as we move into the mid pick, which we touched on a little bit, I mean, this is where you can start to flex if need be. But what else should you be keeping in the back of your mind as you get into the mid pick with your 5 stack?
So mid pick, I think you need to think about counter picks earlier when you're doing coordinated play,
because there's a very good chance your counter picks may get banned out.
That's one major piece. I'm thinking more of like, you need to think of counter picks because you need to think of what's going to counter you, because you can't pick that at the end. You have to pick that now so that what is countering you isn't going to be as effective anymore. So just keep that in mind, because you need to use your last 2 picks to counter them. So you need to do whatever you can to make sure you don't get countered that hard. So if you are in a blow up composition, meaning that you just want to blow up one person as fast as possible, the big counter picks are like Medivh. Well, who counters Medivh? And if you don't want to draft anything that counters Medivh, you need to ban Medivh, because remember, that's when the next ban picks come around, is about those mid picks. So you need to go, okay, so blow up comps, we get countered by Medivh, we get countered by Zarya, we get countered by Tassadar, we get countered by Morales. It's like, well, what counters all of those things is sustained damage. So you might need to look at that ahead of time and go, well, we've got our blow up comp, but we also need something that can sustain them down before, or we need to try to trick them. There's sometimes with blow up comps, people double down. They run 2 different types of blow ups. One that's a 2-man combo, and then one's a 3-man combo, because you can only save one person. So like you do your 3-man combo, and then they use something to stop it, and then you immediately do a 2-man combo and you kill someone when all their stuff's down. You can double down with that. In fact, that was something that did happen in the HGC finals. They, instead of running like sustain to try to answer their blow up comp, they just ran 2 separate blow up comps. One was with one was with a Kerrigan and a Tyrande, and the other one, or no, it was Kerrigan and Thrall, if I remember right, was one blow up comp, and then the other one was Tyrande, Jaina, and Diablo. And they just had 2 separate ones to like, you couldn't save both, and it worked really well until it didn't. And so that's the big challenge, is you need to be thinking about counter picks in your mid pick, but you should still be filling out your draft priority. Focus on what wins the game. And middle is you already have the basis of what's going to win the map. Now you need to finish it up in the middle of the game, middle of the draft. I mean,
Kyle, I see gears turning.
Yeah. Do you have those? You got some plans you want to throw out there? Weird things? Anything too cute for this? Well,
that's the thing, right? Because if we're all on board for it, we can get extra cute.
Oh, you definitely can get extra cute. I mean, like coordinated plays when you can get wild. That's when Juice Pirate sneaks out. One of the guys I was queuing with for a while, he had a Probius variant thing that he used to do, where you would like slow someone down, and then you would set up a bunch of like W's in like a bush or somewhere, and right as someone's about to walk in, you taunt them and then get a kill. Or you would set up maybe one, and then you taunt them, and you have enough time to set up 2 more and then throw out a Q and get a kill. And like, you can get real cute when you're in coordinated teams. There's a lot of weird stuff that people get away with.
So one thing that happens in lesser skilled 5 stacks is you don't get to play a lot of games together. You're more casual. So you start to discover one comp and you just start doing it on repeat. And there's nothing really wrong with that until you hit Dragonshire and Sky Temple, because all of a sudden your solo laner is not necessarily your second objectiver.
Yeah.
And things fall apart. So what sort of changes do you make in the mid picks on those 2 maps that make sure we can cover all those bases?
So the big thing on like the maps that get you away from team fights, so like when I see a lot of teams that are really good at team fights, in the competitive scene, you get to choose the maps that you get to play on. So they'll pick Battlefield of Eternity to force team fights. If you're playing with friends and you get random maps, that's where if you have one team comp that you really like, you play that team comp on every single map, and then you come up with pocket strategies on the maps that you don't want to play on. I have a little mini pocket strategy for maps where like your solo laner needs to hold something. Is I just run heavy siege damage, and I just ignore everything. Like I just ignore the objective, and you just siege endlessly. It's like Dragonshire. A lot of teams will try to put like one in the top lane, one in the middle lane, 3 in the bottom lane. Or they'll have like 4 people try to rotate from mid to bot and then have their person in the solo lane. Change it up a little bit. Like one of the strategies that I use on Dragonshire is just 4-person heavy siege and just endlessly push bot. You just turn off structure. You hold bottom lane because you have 4 people down there, and then you just toss in a Gul'dan and a Malfurion, keep him topped off, and have him just endlessly throwing Q. Turrets are down. Q. Turrets down. Q. You've got the fountain that's down. And it's like, even if you never win the objective, you still get to play as a 4-man. You still get to take team fights. You still get to do everything that you want to do. Just one person in your team just does nothing. And maybe draft a Dahaka with them. So if they ever try to send too many people down bot, use that global. You'll never win top lane, but you'll still get those team fights that you guys like. So that's one plan. The other plan is change up the lanes a little bit to where you still get to play with your teams a little bit more. Run on Braxis, run things that gank top lane more often. Run Lucio, have them give movement speed to everyone rotating. Or throw 2 people top, 3 people bot, so you still get to kind of play together a little bit. Like, that's something that I think is very underrated about Braxis is so many people will always throw just a solo laner top, but 2 people almost always beats a solo laner as long as you plan for it ahead of time. Rather than just sending like a healer and one other person top, plan it out. Run a Tracer and Tassadar up top. It's a very powerful combo in the 2-man that nobody thinks about. Tassadar's going to cover all the wave clear. He's going to dominate up there. And then even if you lose the 3v4 down bot, you hold top forever until you're ready for team fights, and then you just go do team fights.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing, you just mentioned that is so feels so specific to coordinated play. What are you going to do? Take Tassadar in a pickup game and be like, hey, you go Tracer, let's be friends. Like, no, you can't do that. The Tracer has to trust the Tassadar, and the Tassadar has to trust the Chaser, and you have to be able to speak to one another.
Oh yeah, so that's what I'm saying is like in these coordinated games, you can get cheesy, you can get crazy, or if you have a team comp that wins on every single map except for the ones that you split, come up with some cheesy strategies for those maps. Like do something weird, bring out the weirdness in your roster that you never get to play. For the longest time, Nazeebo was my highest level hero, and I played him so weird. And it's like whenever I could bring that out, I'm like, oh, we're gonna see something fun here. But yeah, no, I mean, that's where you can bring out the weird stuff. Like 90% of maps, I would say you can have team fights happen every objective. Then you get like those weird spread out maps like Dragonshire and Braxis, and it's like, I mean, you could always be like, there's a team in China that was really well known for just endlessly pushing as a 5-man on those maps and just ignoring everything else. They just got a really good team that pushes as 5. And they just ignored the objective on Braxis. They pushed his 5. By the time the enemies won the objective, they had already taken a keep. And it was like, that's as much as the objective was going to get anyways. So then they just go and they just take another keep. And it's like, sometimes it's weird stuff like that works. I mean, Juice Pirates, that works. And that's stupid. So, you just... So
I realize at this point, we've said the name several times. Is this like we don't want to encourage Juice Pirates, or should we let people know what the comp is? And
I'll explain it. So Juice Pirates is based off of I'll get into the name afterwards, but Juice Pirates is based off of Morales using her ultimate ability, not the stim drone, the other one, the little ship, and everyone gets in it and they go behind your keep and they kill the keep, and then they all die. And then the next time that they're all up, they go to your core and they take out your core. And usually, if it's done correctly, it should only ever have to go 3 times. So 3 ultimates and you win the entire game. It's great on big maps. It's usually used on Sky Temple. So if you're on Sky Temple and you're in a coordinated team and they pick Tyrael, Morales, or even Artanis or Raynor, you see something like that, you ban Morales as fast as possible. Like if they picked Tyrael on Sky Temple, ban Morales. Because if you're not used to dealing with it, you will lose the game, period. And it's something that like good teams that are really good at it almost have no counter. So if you see a big map and you see them pick anything like that, Tyrael or even Morales, ban the Tyrael. Normally, Morales and Tyrael are picked together, so it's hard to know when it's coming. But the reason that Tyrael's used is because they're going to be invincible for a good portion. So they start off, they fly in, right? They're all behind your keep. And they just let Tyrael tank for the most part until everyone on your team shows up, and then boom, they're all invincible. And they continue DPSing it until your keep's gone. Same thing with your core. They all go to your core, and you guys are all still trying to soak. You're trying to win objectives. You're trying to do stuff. Now you're all backing, so they get 6 seconds to do whatever they want to. Then when you all show up, then they've got 2 more seconds, 3 more seconds from sanctification. So it's insane. And it does a ridiculous amount of damage. And it literally only takes 3 ults, which is, if I remember, at 300 seconds. So about 5 minutes after level 10, they win the game. And they can do it in 2. There are some team comps, like one person's playing it right now with Rain of Destruction, and they're winning in two ults every time. So 200 seconds. That's, 3 minutes after they hit level 10.
Kyle, we gotta try this, man. I need your all aboard your Morales bus.
We did it with Syndragosa. That was our big cute move. Was we would freeze the buildings when we landed. Gray main for the DPS. Oh yeah, and it was dirty. It's dirty stuff. Particularly when we did it in quick match. That was just rude, but you know.
Yeah, it is a bit rude in quick match. But that's Juice Pirates, and it's considered like one of the cheesiest comps. The reason it's called Juice Pirates is debatable, but from my understanding of it anyways, is that Raynor used to give a buff to his team which increased the attack speed of everything when he pressed W, so that's why people called it juicing up their team. And then you would have the pirate ship that Morales had, but Raynor's not usually used with it anymore because Greymane does more siege damage, Artanis does more siege damage, and Gul'dan does more siege damage. So he's actually not really in the comp anymore. But yeah, that's essentially where it comes from. And then Tyrael, he gets the increased attack speed now off of his level 7. So he buffs everyone with attack speed. He drops his sanctification. He keeps everyone up. It's a really mean composition, and it's nasty. There's not a lot of counters to it. So if you guys are playing coordinated teams and you get a map like Sky Temple, I would never feel bad with someone sneaking out a Morales ban just in case.
No, but when you're in this much control of your team, this is something we used to do in StarCraft. You get on a map you just didn't like, so you 6-pool. Yeah, you want it to be over. You didn't like this map anyway. Why not take your lowest win rate map and have some fun with it if you've got a winning track on the other ones?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where I'm saying, come up with cheesy strategies for the maps that you guys just don't like or you just can't do. If you guys are just losing a lot on the map, that's a good time to watch replays with your team and go like, what could we be doing differently? Are we just drafting poorly? Like, what are we doing? But if there's just a map you just don't like, make it fun.
Yeah.
Make it fun.
Thanks, Kyle. Now I miss 6 pools.
Well, yeah, there are 13 pools now,
yeah,
right? They don't even exist.
You start with way more workers now in StarCraft.
Yeah.
But anyways. So any final thoughts on mid picks, or should we go on into late picks?
I think it's pretty solid. Just try to fill out what your team needs. And again, like those 5 points. I didn't bring up the 5 points in this video. We brought it up last week. So if you haven't watched it, there's 5 major things that every team comp needs. And then there's 4 things that I recommend every team comp have. Every team needs wave clear, camp clear, burst, sustain damage, and CC. Every single team, without question, needs all 5 of those things. However, adding siege damage, poke, setup, and follow-up could really assist any team. So like the first 5 make sure that you just don't lose by default. And the next 4 makes it to where if you do win a team fight, then you give the enemies less time to get another team fight. The amount of times where like I've won a team fight at level 13 and taken a keep because of it, or the amount of times that you win a team fight at level 16, you end out the game, reduces the chance the enemy team gets an opportunity to come back into the game. They hit a power spike that's good for them and comes back, which is why having that extra siege damage is really, really nice. Having that setup and follow up makes it to where like you don't get an awkward team fight. Like if there's ever an awkward team fight, you have set up to make sure that's a good team fight for you. You have follow up to make sure that that's a good team fight. So every team needs those first 5, but adding those next 4 makes it to where the enemies have less times to come back to the game. So I would say always look for those. But yeah, I think that's it. Just fill out those for your mid picks and move on to the late picks.
Well, that means it's time to talk about late picks. So we're here. We made it through the final ban phase, which we kind of already talked about in the mid pick section.
Yeah, and with our solo play, we kind of relied on everyone. Solo has a much kind of wider roster, but solo lane players in coordinated play, I find, are often the most restricted. They really, really like their Sonya this meta or their Rexar this meta. And we end up early picking that. Whereas what I call the special agent tends to be the final pick here. And that's the person who can't decide what they really want to play. They know they want to be something awesome. So it's your Illidan, it's your Genji, it's your Butcher player. Not a bad last pick, but they sort of dominate that space more often, personality-wise.
It's tricky. I mean, in the competitive scene, I would still recommend last picking like a solo laner. But if someone on your team does want to play Illidan, that is the role you need to last pick it. It's if you have last picks, that's kind of the upside. Is like if the enemy has first pick, they're going to pick the best thing for the map. If you have last pick, you can pick one uncounterable hero, one uncountered hero. So both teams have a major tool if they want to go for it. But generally, yeah, you still want to have like wide roster pool things last pick just so you have answers. I mean, that's the thing is say someone's running a blow up comp. You need something in a last pick situation that can save one person from getting blown up, which oftentimes is not necessarily the solo lane, but a Medivh, a Tassadar, a Zarya, you could throw them in the solo lane, but I wouldn't recommend it. That answers that. If you need to answer like a dive composition, you need a Gust, you need a Sanctification, you need a Bunker. And those are all in the solo lane. And so you need to figure out some way to split even a ley line. I mean, you could fit it in a couple different roles, but generally it's in the solo lane. But yeah, I mean, last picks, counter picks. Whatever the enemy's trying to do, find ways around it. If they did get Juice Pirates, you want Gust, if you can get it, and Gust them right before they do Sanctification. You want knockbacks. Stukov's not bad because you can silence, which forces them all to walk in a different area, stalls out where they're going. You can knock them all away before they get there because they will only use Sanctification right when they're on the point. So right as where the thing's landing a lot of times. So right as it starts to land, drop down a silence pool underneath it. Half of them are going to stay in auto attack, and then you can have another person gust them away. There's a lot of tricks to it. One of my favorite counters that's normally not banned, because if you're playing Juice Pirates, you ban all of your counters. One of my favorite ones that's not thought about it is Apocalypse from Diablo, because when Sanctification ends, they're all going to be stunned, and they overlap. People don't really realize that the stuns will overlap. So if you're all clustered together, everyone takes 5 sets of damage. So not only does everyone get stunned, but they all take like half their health off of the Apocalypse. But yeah, I mean, like your last 2 picks just need to counter whatever the enemies are trying to do. If they go wombo combos, you want people who can spread out in fights, which is usually like a dive composition, but you can't do a dive composition in the last 2 picks. So you have to find things that can spread out, or you have to find things that can like force an engage earlier than they want. Or just things that can knock enemies away. But that's last picks. Like either fixing, I would say countering, or if you had a plan all along. If you have second pick, then your plan could be, we're going to build a whole comp around getting that Illidan out there, you know, or we're going to run a whole comp about sneaking out a Sergeant Hammer at the end, right? And if they don't pick a counter to a Sergeant Hammer, it's going to be pretty rough. Like, it's just one of those heroes you just can't get close enough to. So if you have second pick, that's when your last pick can be your entire strategy. But if not, just counter pick whatever the enemies are trying to do.
I dig. Kyle, any follow-up thoughts? I think of the solo lane as a highly flexible thing, but maybe that's just because it's been my project for the last few months, is to learn other solo laners as my pick has gotten more and more contested.
Absolutely. And that's very much from my own personal experience, where the solo laners I've played alongside have had very limited picks. And so our final pick has gone more into that Illidan, or what can we pull off? Also part of the personality of my flex player in particular. At the end here, though, I do want to ask about the cheesy openers. And they're not that cheesy. I mean, it's we all made up that we're all going to go fight on the Sky Temple watchtower, that we'd all stand around in the middle of Alterac Pass. But there has been an increase in people all charging one lane, usually bottom or top, and trying to get a tower. They're not worth the XP they used to be, but that's an advantage for the future. What sort of value can be gained by those moves, and then should teams adapt them?
For like cheesing out like the beginning of a game, I don't think there's really, it gives you a little bit of an advantage, but it's never really that worth it. I mean, you do it because you can get free experience, and that's about it. There are times where that is part of a bigger strategy. There's an entire strategy. So do you know, like on Sky Temple, how the objective doesn't take the full fort? It'll destroy the 2 front walls and do half of the keep's health, or half of the fort's health. Well, there is a strategy where people do that cheesy thing, and they'll take the top 2 towers immediately as the game starts, and suddenly that top objective will take the fort fully. And there are strategies to that. So there are extra things you can add to your strategies to give yourself advantages by doing something small in the early game. But honestly, that's just things that you'll adapt to on the maps. You'll kind of learn when people are trying to do stuff like that. Send a couple extra people top, have people close to being top in case that does happen. But overall, and set priorities too. And on Sky Temple, I think the biggest thing people always mix up is what priority you should be going for what objective. So like, if 2 objectives spawn, why should you go to one over the other one? You should look at the state of the map and go, what do they gain if they get this one? What do we gain if they get this one, or if we get this one? And then look at the other one and have the same reasoning. And then I always say priority whatever. So if I'll look at the map really quick when they're about to spawn, and then when it says 30 seconds, I'll say priority bot, priority mid, priority top, based off of which team gets more value and what we can get more. So if we take a trade, our trade comes out more favorably is kind of my hope out of that. But yeah, honestly, I wouldn't worry about those cheesy strats too much. You can plan for them if you want to, but they're not as good as they used to be. Destroying 2 towers in the early game used to be like a full level lead. Now it's like, it's a wave of experience. So if one team gets a tower and the other team gets 2 waves and you don't, the team that got 2 waves is going to be ahead on experience. You're just ahead on structures. So I spend
that energy having a more efficient draft and having a good solid rotation, maybe double soak or maybe a good merc camp, rather than saying, you know what defines us as a team? We get that bottom tower every time.
There's one team that I can't remember if they were in like Division C or Division B, but their whole gimmick was to suicide for the well. So like the start of every single game, they would all just pick a different well and just suicide and take the wells.
I do.
And for the rest of
I hate losing wells.
And like for the rest of the game, the enemies would have no wells. And like, it's funny, but at the same time, it's like that first objective would roll around while one team wouldn't have wells. They would be like up 2 levels and usually a talent tier. And it was like, is that worth it? because you're not just all dying and giving experience, you're also missing like the first 2 waves of experience too. And it's like, is that really worth the wells? Maybe on some maps like Dragonshire where the maps go a long time, and those wells could be a huge difference, but most maps that's like a terrible idea. So yeah, I mean, it's this, you can do that. Honestly, focus on just getting your drafts done. I would say that the biggest issue about late picks is like when we mention counter picks, like try to always look at what the enemy team's trying to do and get creative. I think for some people really overthink counter picks. Like Cho'Gall is in my opinion the most like overthought counter, where like the enemy team gets a Cho'Gall out and everyone's like, let's get a Malthael, let's get a Leoric, let's get a Tychus, let's get out a Kharazim, let's get out all this stuff. And it's like that Cho'Gall, like when Tychus is in range of Cho'Gall, that Tychus is dead. Just because something has % health doesn't mean that it's the best counter. When I see Cho'Gall, I'm just gonna play a Nubrock, cocoon him, and we'll just kill the rest of his team. You know, like I don't think that hard about getting % health to take out Cho'Gall. Your sustained damage is going to eventually kill him. And a lot of people don't even realize Stitches has more health than Cho'Gall does. The big reason why Cho'Gall is scary is because he's 2 heroes in one that does a lot of damage and has great scaling. So it's like, if all you cared about was the health of Cho'Gall, you should be drafting all that against the Stitches too, but you don't, because you don't need to worry about a Stitches, because Stitches doesn't do that much. That's why it's better to turn off Cho'Gall and kill his team or win the objective, and then he turns back on, he's already lost everything, rather than trying to deal with anything else. So like, if they pick Cho'Gall, my last pick's gonna be something that can turn him off. And there's a variety of heroes that do that. If you're stuck in let's say the tank role, you pick a Nubrock. If you're in the assassin role, you pick Maiev. If you're in the support role, then sorry, my man. No,
Stukov.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm like, you can pick Stukov. Oh yeah, you could just push him away at 10. Or level 13. I mean, you get Pacify on Alexstrasza. You reduce 2 different heroes by 50%. Whitemane, I believe they moved that and it's 60% now. It might be 50%. So you press W, you reduce the damage of 2 different heroes at the same time. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like things like that you can counter him with in every single role that's not % health. He still dies to just regular damage more often than not. I mean, don't get me wrong, he has that 25% armor while Stitches doesn't, but
no, there's no quicker way to learn who can't play Leoric than to fight a Cho'Gall.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I think we've kind of covered all the bases again here, which I
think so.
Brings us to the end of the coordinated draft episode. So thanks again for stopping by, Paradox. Thank you everybody for listening. Huge thanks, by the way, to our patrons. If you like this show, you want to support it, head on over to patreon.com/ITN. And big thanks to our producers, Declan H, Cheesy Bob, Chris K, and Robert M. Gets you access to all kind of perks, things like the Discord, patron bonanzas where we get together with our patrons and go into unranked and draft together. Maybe we'll even do some of the silliness we talked about today. We'll see.
I didn't realize I never took you on a juice ride, man. I'm sorry.
Never took me on. You're always playing with Scott and crew, man. I never get invited to the juice runs. Doesn't happen.
I'm sorry. We'll make it happen.
All right. I don't know if I believe that.
Sometime patron bonanza. All right, we're gonna do it.
All right.
Do some juice pirates.
Yeah. Just remind me. See Sky Temple? It's happening. You see Towers of Doom? It doesn't work.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't expect it to work on Towers of Doom.
Rather disappointing.
Yeah, that'd be a problem. Keep sending your emails in to itncast@gmail.com. Tweet to the show at itncast. That is how we came up with the idea for doing these kind of these really heavy topic draft focused episodes, because y'all kept asking us about drafting, about combating ladder anxiety, all that kind of stuff. So keep them coming. itncast@gmail.com. Before we leave, NotParadox, where can people find you and all of the awesome content that you're creating outside of guesting on Into the Nexus?
Yeah. Again, guys, I just recommend Googling NotParadox. You'll find all of my stuff. You can follow me on Twitter, where I just usually rant about people baking. No, just random stuff. Then you can follow me on Facebook. It's pretty much just a meme page at this point, but I love it. And and anything else, feel free to follow me. Most of my content that you're going to find from me is on YouTube. I bring out guides for just about everything. And again, this entire month of October, I am doing a series talking about all the heroes that I used to get back to Masters after placing low and then decaying even further down. I got back up to Masters in about 2 days, and I did it with these heroes. So I just wanted to show you guys these heroes. I think by the end of the 2 days, I had a 79% win rate. So feel free to check out any of those heroes, the guides that I give along the way. And thank you guys so much for having me on. I always love being on here.
Yeah, we love it when you come back. Kyle, what about you, dude? How you doing? Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me over at KyleFergusson.com, 2 S's in Fergusson. You can find the stream at twitch.tv/KyleFergusson. And you'll probably be seeing my baby on the stream because, we're going to keep streaming, but we got a baby. So you know what? He can hang out. All right.
Yeah.
He'll be there.
Sounds awesome.
He'll be there.
Folks, I'm Garrett Art on Twitter. This podcast and others like it can be found at amove.tv. Go subscribe to The Angry Chicken for Hearthstone. Catch me on the Instance. Let's Talk About Star Wars has new episodes coming out. There's all kinds of stuff. amove.tv. Check it out. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. Until next time, good luck and have fun, everyone.
Take care.